the first time, after learning some of the ideas of Sukkot. That's chapter 2, the laws of the Sukkah. Basic definitions are in the beginning. It's a mitzvah to reside in the Sukkah throughout the 7 days. And the Sukkah we're commanded to live in during the festival is defined as dirat arai. Arai means temporary residence. Dira, residence. Thus, a Sukkah must meet these two basic conditions. It must be temporary, it must be habitable. You have to be able to live in it, and it has to be temporary. Therefore, if a Sukkah is less than 10 tfachim tall, or less than 7 tfachim by 7 tfachim wide, it is invalid. It is too cramped, even for one person to sit in and eat. Even if a Sukkah is very long, if it is less than 7 tfachim wide, it is invalid. So 7 by 7, with a height of 10 tfachim. You know how much 10 tfachim is? A tefach is a hand's breadth. Standard measurement is 8 centimeters. 8 times 10, 80 centimeters. It's about this height. So, and 7 tfachim, by 7 tfachim, 7 times 8 is 56. So it's pretty much the size of this table. But this is a rectangle. It has to be square. 7 by 7 square is the minimum size. So if you can get in underneath, if you made a sukkah this size, and you managed to cramp and crawl in and sit there, and you put tzchach over on top, as we're going to see, it would be kosher. That's the minimum, 7 by 7. One person can sit there and eat. Good enough. There is a fellow who lives in Jerusalem, in Nachlaot. He's a little famous, he's a singer, Aharon Razel. Every year he puts a sukkah outside his house, that size. With a sign on it, it says, whoever wants to stop and have a bite to eat, here's your sukkah. And if he's got a little mat in there, it's cute. But that's the minimum, obviously. Maximum is, the more the merrier. We'll see, maybe there's a maximum. But now, in terms of the walls, it's funny. What constitutes an enclosure? So there's rules for different areas of halacha. There are some rules about Shabbat. Why would we need to have an enclosure for Shabbat? What laws of Shabbat are relevant when it comes to a house? Anybody? It's one of the laws of Shabbat that has to do with a private area, like a house. What law is there regarding Shabbat? Eruv is connected. What happens when you don't have Eruv? Eruv is the solution. What's the problem? Or what's the difficulty?
Carry.
Exactly. We usually in English we call it carrying. In Hebrew the term is hotza'ah, which means taking out or bringing things in. The Torah, and one of the 39 categories of work which are prohibited on Shabbat, one of them is called hotza'ah, which in English we usually translate as carrying, because there's two aspects to it. One aspect is you're not allowed to carry in a reshut harabim, in a public thoroughfare. You're not allowed to carry any object and traverse 4 cubits, about 2 meters. But there's another element of that, is that if you're in the reshut harabim, if you're in a public domain, you're not allowed to transfer anything into a private domain. And if you're in a private domain, you can't transfer anything into a public domain. Why you've never heard of this is because in most Jewish communities, they found a solution, and that is that, well, if we make the whole neighborhood a private domain by putting up a fence around it or a wall around it, so then we can carry in and out of our houses. We can take our talit to shul, our sidur, we can take the baby in and out of the house to the park. Because if you don't have that wall around the neighborhood, you're not allowed to carry and to bring things inside or outside. It's called the prohibition of hotza'ah. So most Jewish communities nowadays, they have an eruv. This eruv is a makeshift wall or perimeter Sometimes the halacha has halakhic tricks for what constitutes a wall. We'll see that regarding an eruv. We'll see it soon regarding a sukkah. But that's one area of halacha where we have to define what is a private domain versus what's a public domain. What's the area that you're allowed to carry, the area you're not allowed to carry in. Sukkah is the other major area where we have a definition of a sukkah. So we have to define it. What is the space that's called a sukkah? And so the standard assumption is that to make a private domain for the laws of Shabbat, you need 4 walls. That's most houses have 4 walls. You're allowed to have a door, but 4 walls. Some people say, you know what? 3 walls is also okay because maybe you just have a large door, but you have to have 3 walls to make a private domain for Shabbat. Regarding Sukkah, we have a very special halacha. Also, it's called halacha Machon Meir. There's a few laws that were transmitted orally by tradition from very, very ancient times. And the law says, regarding a sukkah, well, sukkah is supposed to be a temporary residence, right? Dirat arai. So we can relax those rules even more. And instead of having 3 walls, which are necessary regarding Shabbat to create a home, this, for sukkah, the halacha says, you're even allowed to have 2 walls and a tefach. The 3rd wall can be not complete. And so 2 and a bit really is the minimum amount of walls. Again, there's some details exactly how they're constructed, they're put together. There has to be an L, at least on one area. And then there's a rule that says that as long as you have the wall starting, how much is the starting of a wall? Well, the minimal measurement we said is 7 by 7. So usually they say if you start off a wall, if you have 7 tfachim of a wall on this side, and then 7 tfachim of a wall on this side, okay? So you've got an L. I'll do it on the board. That's maybe a little bit nicer.
Well, the board is clear.
Yes, Shmuel. Thank you, Shmuel. So here's 7 and here's 7. So what about this? So there's a rule that you need a 3rd wall. But where's the 3rd wall? How do you make the 3rd wall? So there's a rule, simple reason. You would think you need a full 7 tfachim as well. Now you can have extending this wall, and you can have, this wall can be extended too. It doesn't have to be only 7 by 7. You could have, the entire thing is, 100 tfachim, whatever you want. However big the sukkah you want it to be. But what about your 3rd wall? Your 3rd wall, according to this halacha Moshe Sinai, afilu tefach. 1 tefach? So actually, it's not so simple. You can have a space of 3 tfachim, as long as you have a wall here of a tefach, that connects up. So we have 1 solid beam, I guess you could say, which is the width of a tefach. The 3 tefach space, there's a law, it's called lavud, it's connected. Halachically, it's considered to be connected. So then you've got 4. 4 is the majority of 7. That's good enough. That's all you need. This is the basic halacha. So 7 by 7 in a corner, an L, and then the 3rd wall can be 1 tefach only. Of course, it has to be placed just so. But the bottom line is, really, we're looking for 3 walls, and the 4th wall is not necessary. So if you just have, a sukkah of 3 walls, for sure it's kosher. 3 full walls, no problem. You don't have to have a 4th wall. And of course, if you want to put doors, there's no problem putting in doors and so forth. But anyways, these are some interesting laws. Let's read it at the bottom of page 28. Since the sukkah is a temporary residence, it does not need 4 walls. It's sufficient to have 2 walls plus a tefach of the 3rd. This is a partial 3rd wall, must be within 3 tefachim of one of the other walls, as I just drew on the board. Okay, so far so good? What about the height? What did we say about the height? Good morning, Hananel. Good morning, Israel. What the height of the sukkah?
It needs to be over 10.
Over 10 tfachim. But how tall? What if it's 100 tfachim? What if it's 1,000 million tfachim? What if you make your schach up on the 4th floor and you're sitting down on the ground floor? Is that kosher?
Yes.
You would think so. But to take a look at the next paragraph. Jake, why don't you read it for us?
Okay, so since sukkah is...
If a sukkah...
A sukkah is a temporary residence...
No, next paragraph.
If a sukkah is more than 20 amot tall, it is invalid, because a sukkah must be a temporary residence, while sukkah is placed at such a height needs the support of a permanent structure. Note, however, that the main expression of the sukkah's impermanence is the sukkah. The walls may be permanent as long as this is not necessary to support the sukkah. Thus, one may retract the roof in the home and place a sukkah instead of a ceiling, since the sukkah is less than 20 amot high. It does not need the support of a permanent structure.
So I have a cousin who actually had that in his home. He had an area of his home that had a retractable roof, and he stayed in his regular house where he ate all year round, and on Sukkot, he just pulled back the roof, put down some schach, and that was his sukkah. It's a kosher sukkah. Sukkah, the word sukkah, actually stems from the word schach. What does the word schach mean? Lesochech is to cover. It says about the cherubs, these wing-like structures in the temple, that they are sochechim bechanfeihem ala kaporet, that they were covering with their wings on top of the lid of the Aron Kodesh. So schach, sukkah, it's all about covering. The essence of the sukkah is the covering. Now there's minimum requirements about the walls. You have to have some kind of walls, but essentially the most important part is the schach. And so, but the schach cannot be higher than 20 amot, 9 meters. I don't think any. I've never seen a sukkah with a 9 meter high. Maybe I've seen 3 meters high, 4 meters high, right? But 9. So you really have a lot of leeway there. But there is a maximum height. Some people say you can't see the schach if it's so high. If it's 9 meters high, you can't. The whole point of the sukkah is to see the schach. Well, halachic reasoning is more like he says here that it's considered a permanent structure. You don't actually have to see the schach. If you have it 8.5 meters, you can't see it either very well, but it's still kosher because the halacha gets defined 20 amot. It's about 9 meters. So you have to have. We talked about the walls. We talked about the size of the walls. We talked about the height. Now we have to talk about what is schach. What is kosher schach? 2 rules. One rule is easy to understand. The other rule is a little bit harder to understand. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Should I start with the easy one or the hard one? Fight it out. What do you say, Binyamin? Should I start with the easy rule about the schach or the hard one?
What is the difficult one?
The difficult one? You want to start with the difficult one? Okay. Okay, Hananel, you're ready for it? It's too early in the morning, he says. What? Start with the difficult. Well, I'm not going to explain it too much, but it doesn't matter. There is how many books in the Torah? 5. Right? Well, Chumash. In Chumash. How many books? 5. Along came, and what were the oral teachings about the Torah, about the Chumash? Where were the oral teachings collected? In what kind of book? Midrash, right? Midrash is the oral teachings that got written down by the sages, structured by the Chumash, structured by the whole Tanakh, actually. There's Midrash on other books of Tanakh too. So far, so good? Now, along came a fellow called Yehuda. His mother called him Yehuda. We call him Rabbi Yehuda. The prince. And he was a revolutionary kid. He was the leader of the entire Jewish people. When did he live? Judah the prince? Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi?
Starting of the end of the Chazal, first.
Not the end of the Chazal. Smack in the middle of Chazal. He's the end of the Tanaim. He's halfway through Chazal. He was one of those sages. Very important sage. Lived about year. Come on. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi became famous, not just because his mother called him Judah and she thought he was a prince. What Jewish mother doesn't think his kid is a prince? Her kid is a prince. Why is he called the prince? Or the president? Judah the president. He was the president of the Jewish community. The Nasi in Hebrew. The Nasi, the president of the Jewish community. This little kid, Yehuda, grew up to be the leader of all the Jews. In what year? Well, I'll tell you. You know what he did to lead the Jewish people? Well, he had international relations. He was good at Torah scholar. He was a great Torah scholar, amazing Torah scholar, foundational Torah scholar. He was the leader of the whole next generation. What did he do that he's famous for?
He wrote the Torah. Wrote the written Torah. The oral Torah.
That's right. For the first time, he said, we're going to write the oral Torah down in a structured fashion. And he created a new structure for Judaism, for the Torah of Judaism. He said, I'm not going to just give commentary to the Chumash. I'm going to take all those oral teachings and I'm going to organize them in what? In the Mishnah. He called his teachings Mishnah. And what was the organizational structure? How many books were there of the Mishnah? How many parts were there in the Mishnah? We call them orders, right? 6 orders of the Mishnah. He says, I'm going to take all those teachings and I'm going to put them in a new. It'll dry, Jake. Any notebook that's not coffee stained is not a real notebook. So it's all right. It's even better. You wouldn't. Exactly, totally. Just sorry about your coffee, but okay. Don't want it to ruin your day or anything. So, doesn't it look pretty, guys? Tell them it looks pretty. Come on, show everybody your notebook. Show how the coffee stains look good. And anyways, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he was the leader, and he was the Nasi, the president, the leader of the Jewish community, and he was an innovator because he dared to write down these oral teachings, but also he dared to create a new structure for all these teachings called the 6 orders of the Mishnah. Now tell me, what year did he live? You should know this.
250.
Where'd you pull that one from? You're trying to remember. You're close, but you're close. The standard, Chazal's year 0 to 500, right? You remember this, right? So what happened? What numbers did I tell you? How did the 500 get divided? The 500 years of Chazal get divided into 2 sections, the Tanaim and the Amoraim, right? The authors of the Mishnah and the authors of the Talmud, the Gemara, that elaborates upon the basic canonized book of the six orders. The dividing line, what do we always say, is year 200. 0 to 200 is Tanaim. 200 to 500 is Amoraim. That means that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who actually compiled, edited, wrote the Mishnah, has got to be around year 200. Okay, so I'm not telling you precisely that's when he was born and when he died, but for us to remember the concept, conceptually, Chazal has 2 periods to it, Tanaim and Amoraim. Tanaim authors of the Mishnah. The Mishnah was compiled, finished, finalized, sealed, year 200. From then on, everybody discussing it, everybody studying Torah, studied 2 books. They studied the Chumash and the Tanakh, and they studied the Mishnah. And all those discussions of the Mishnah vis-a-vis the Tanakh and the logic and the other passages, that's all collected in the Gemara, which makes up the Talmud, okay? So, who can tell me what are the 5 books of the Chumash? Start from the beginning. First one is Bereshit, no? First book of the Chumash. Chumash. Bereshit. What's the next book? Book number 2. It has a name in Hebrew. What? Shemot. And then the next book? No. Vayikra. The next book? Bamidbar. Now you're on. And finally, Dvarim. What are we reading now in Parshat HaShavua? The book of Dvarim. We're almost finished. Good. Who can tell me the 6 orders of the Mishnah? Ha 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 ha. Have another coffee, Jake. Jug that memory. We said there's an acronym, Zman Nakat. Remember that? Take time. Take your time. Zman stands for Zra'im, which is the law of agriculture. Moed stands for, Mem stands for Moed, which is about the laws of the holidays. Nashim. Oh, good. The notebook remembers, even with the coffee. You see that? Nashim is women's laws. Nezikin, laws of damages. Kodashim, the laws of sacrifices, holy things in the temple, and Toharot. Tohorot, some people say Taharot, some people say Tohorot. Tohorot means purity, the laws of purity and impurity. The 6th order, 1 out of the 6 categories of the laws of the Torah. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi called them Taharot. The law. Now this is the hard one. This is my introduction to the hard rule about the schach. Remember we're talking about the schach? And I said there's 2 criterion for kosher schach. One is easy, one is hard. We said Binyamin chose the hard one first. The hard one has to do with the laws of tahara, purity and impurity. And it's so hard because we don't really practice most of those laws, and so we don't know them so well. And they're very foreign to us. It's not like the laws of Shabbat or the laws of kosher. We do that every day. That's concepts we're used to. So the first condition for kosher schach is that it's made out of material which is not susceptible to tum'ah. Tum'ah is the opposite of tahara, ritual impurity. Okay, so it doesn't tell us too much. Because you have to know a little bit about the laws of purity and impurity to know what constitutes pure and impure. For example, a vessel like this cup is susceptible to being impure. Whereas, I guess this piece of paper is not a vessel. It can never become impure. Even if I put it onto a dead body, it doesn't become impure. It's not a vessel. If I touch this to the dead body, it would become impure. It'd have to be purified in a mikveh.
It must be a vessel.
Has to be a vessel. That's one of the rules of something that's susceptible to tumah. So for the laws of schach, it's not allowed to be susceptible to tumah, so it cannot be made out of vessels. Okay? It's one of the rules. That's the hard one. Got that? One condition? Not susceptible. Made from something not susceptible to tumah. The first condition is easy to understand because we know what a tree is. We know what the ground is. It has to be coming from the earth. It has to be a natural product which came out of the ground. That's condition number 1. So we have condition number 1 and number 2. One is it has to be made from it has to be organic material. Number two, not susceptible to tuma. So if you take a tree and you chop it down, and you put the leaves and the trunk on, and it has to be disconnected from the ground. It has to be organic but disconnected. Can't be attached to the ground. That's part of the condition number one. And you take that and you put it on top of your sukkah. You make 4 walls, 3 walls, 2.5, right? You play with it. You have a structure of the walls, and the dimensions are correct. It's larger than 7 by 7. It's higher than 10 tefachim tall. And you want to put schach on it now. Cut down your tree, or cut down some of the branches, and put them on. You're good to go. But if you take that same wood and you carve a bowl out of the wood, or if you attach the branches together, maybe you use them like, have you ever done basket weaving? You take some leaves and some straw, and you make it into a basket, and then you put that on your roof. It's not kosher because it's susceptible to tumah, even though it's organic material. It's been cut down. It's made from straw or whatever it is. It became unkosher when you turned it into a vessel. So wood, if it's just planks of wood, which is just cut from a tree, it's kosher. There is a rabbinic stricture that the planks of wood shouldn't be too wide because it looks like a regular roof. And you might just, use your regular roof. In the day of the sages, when these laws were being codified, many of their roofs, take a look up. What's our ceiling? What do we have on top of us? What's that made out of? Cement. Concrete. There's some metal in there. Is that kosher for schach?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. It doesn't grow from the ground. Cement. Metal is processed. It's definitely receives tuma. Not kosher. This is not a kosher wall. But in the day, and till today, in some places, roofs and ceilings are made out of wood. So essentially, it's kosher for sukkah. No? Why not?
Because
Why not?
it needs to be impermanent, the roof of the sukkah.
Right, so the question is, how do we define impermanent? As long as it's not more than 9 meters tall, it's not necessarily considered to be permanent. What makes it permanent? We said that these dimensions and the schach, but if it's kosher schach, it could be there all year round. Like I said the other day, pergolas, people put up these sort of patios, and on top they have like a shade balcony that's made out of wood. Maybe it's kosher. So the problem is, though, that a person would just sit in their house. The way they used to make roofs in the times of the Talmud was they would have wood beams, but on top of the wood beams, because it's going to leak when it rains in between the slats. So they put some plaster. They covered it with a thin layer of plaster, maybe a thick layer of plaster, however solid you wanted to make it, and then that would fill in the cracks. But from the bottom, it looks like beams. It looks like wood. Maybe you'd only see the layer of plaster from the outside. So the rabbis didn't want the sukkah to look too much like a regular ceiling with wooden planks. And they said, rabbinically, the planks... Now, if you had such a home and Sukkot came, all you'd have to do was take off the plaster. It would be kosher. Take off the plaster, you're left with wooden planks. It's great. It's kosher. It's made from organic material. It's been cut down. And it's not susceptible to tumah. So some people would do that. They just take off their plaster from their regular homes and live at home. There's nothing wrong with that. What defines it as impermanent is these halachic definitions, not necessarily how long a structure is standing there. But the rabbi said, it doesn't look good. It looks like a regular house. And so they said it's only kosher if the planks are smaller than usual. You come over, B'ezrat Hashem, to my sukkah, you'll see part of my schach is made out of wooden planks. I'm a very halachic Jew. But they're smaller than a tefach. They're even allowed to be 3 tefach. But the bottom line is that the planks are kosher schach. It's made from wood. Wood is an organic material. It's not a vessel. And there's some more details, but that's the basic halacha of what's kosher for schach. That's what he says here at the bottom, page 29. Also, the wooden ceiling is invalid for use as a sukkah because schach must be impermanent, whereas the ceiling is permanent. To make sure that people do not mistakenly permit wooden ceilings, the sages ruled that lumber commonly used to make ceilings may not be used for schach, and we'll see some details later. Be'ezrat Hashem. Since a sukkah is a temporary residence, it may be built on a wagon. We mentioned that the other day. This rabbi in Stockholm, he rents a wagon, a motor vehicle, or a boat. Have you ever seen a sukkah on a boat?
Yeah.
You have? That's
drawing.
Cool. Yeah, in a drawing. It remains valid even during travel, as long as its walls and schach can withstand an ordinary wind. Right? It has to be able to withstand a wind. As a temporary residence, a sukkah does not require mezuzah. Sukkah is invalid if its walls are unable to withstand an ordinary wind, or if its schach is made of leaves or greenery that will wither or fall during the course of the festival. In both of these cases, it is not even considered a temporary residence. It can't be so flimsy that it's not even going to stand. So, okay. So here we have in number 2, page 30, 3 rules. I made them as 2. It must be made from plant matter. It must be detached from its source, and it must not have been processed in a way that renders it susceptible to tumah. Okay, that's the basic rules. Let's go on. And another important rule about the schach, because the schach is, these walls that we drew here, they can be made of anything. They can be made from plant material, they can be made from metal, they can be made from wood, they can be made from planks, they can be made from even sheets. You're going to see a lot of sukkahs whose walls are made with sheets. Sometimes they're plastic sheeting, sometimes they're cloth, sometimes they're strengthened, sometimes they're painted on, beautiful sukkah decorations. We'll talk about the decorations too, no less important. But as long as they don't blow down in the wind. There is a discussion about these cloth walls. Some rabbis felt, what do you mean they don't blow down in the wind? They blow, they move, and what kind of wall is that moves? So some rabbis say, don't use those cloth sheets for walls of the sukkah. Other rabbis say, wait, if you tie it up very strong, tautly, and it just moves a little, well, even a wooden wall can move a little. Even so what's the definition of moving? Well, they say 3 tfachim, 3 handbreadths, 24 centimeters. As long as it's not going to go in and out 24 centimeters, if you pull it tightly, that'll pretty much stay in place. It'll just waver a little bit. It can shake a little bit, and that's fine. And that's what most people rely on. Most people who make these sukkahs with the flimsy walls, as long as the wall's not going to blow down, and as long as it's not going to blow out and in more than 3 tefachs, it's kosher. But you know what? There's another rule. It's very cool. So let's say you have, this is our grounds. Now over here, you want to build your sukkah, and I'm looking at it from the side. So you build your wall, and this is your wall, and you're going to have a wall here, okay? Soon I'll show you some proper pictures. Okay? 3D. So this wall, we said, what can it be made out of? Over here on top, you're going to have your okay? What's the wall made out of? We said anything. Wood, metal, bricks even, bricks. It's okay. It's still called impermanent. If it has the schach on top of it, the main part of the sukkah is the schach. So if the schach is kosher, the walls can be made from even permanent things. So bricks. Now let's say what happens if you have wood. Okay, you're making your sukkah from wood, but you want to make it from planks of wood. Okay, so you've got planks here. Hey, wait a second. I can save. Maybe I'll have some space in between the planks. Is that kosher? Does it have to be solid? Well, we already touched on before that there's a rule that 3 tfachim is considered to be connected. So here you can have a distance of 3 tfachim. In other words, let's say you've got a white picket fence, you Americans, you know what that is, right? You've got a wooden fence between properties. And it's poles, individual poles, which are distant from each other. These poles, it's a kosher sukkah. Because as long as the distance is less than 3. You see that? It's too small. As long as the distance between the poles is less than 3, it's as if it's a solid wall. Okay, you've got your 7 by 7. That's all you need. That's called lavud. This law that it's connected and less than 3 tfachim is called lavud. It's very ancient halacha. It goes all the way back to halacha of Machon Meir, according to some traditions. Now wait a minute. What if you have another sukkah here? That'll draw the same thing. You get my drift, yeah? Here's another sukkah. This time, I'm going to make the wall, the slats of wood like this. Have you ever seen a fence like this? To stop the cows from passing by, right? Sometimes they make fences like this. Is that kosher? For a sukkah wall? Well, according to the principles, as long as it gets up to 10 tfachim high, right? It's got to get up to 10 tfachim. And it's got to have less than 3 in between the planks. It's kosher. It's as if it's all connected. Okay? So far so good? Everybody got that? So you don't have to actually have a solid wall. You can have airspace, as long as the airspace is less than 3.
The sukkah, it says here 9 meters tall?
Maximum.
Maximum 10.
20 amot, which is approximately 9 meters.
9 meters. Approximately.
Approximately, yeah. An amma is about 48 centimeters. So 48 times 20 is about a little more than 9 meters, right? Do the math. But we're talking about the minimum. The maximum you don't have to worry about. Who makes a height of a building 9 meters? Nobody does that. So, this is what, 3 meters? A standard room can be 2.5 even. There's no problem with a regular. Sometimes sukkahs are a little bit even lower, so you have 2 meters. That's no problem. As long as you're above 10, you're good. Yes?
Rabbi, is it kosher, let's say, I join my sukkah to my neighbor, use my neighbor wall
Yes.
as my wall?
Yeah, you can have a wall being for both sides. Yeah, sure. Another interesting thing is, I just want to continue about what we said. What happens, so how strong does this wall have to be?
It means be able to sustain an ordinary wind.
Exactly, sustain an ordinary wind. Now, let me go to another case. Again, we're going to do the same thing. So you see what I'm doing here, right? You get without, there's the schach. Now, this wall, I'm not going to make it with wooden beams. That's a few inches wide. Let's say I tie up a string over here and I pull it to here. Is the string going to stay there in a regular wind? Sure. It's a strong wire, or as long as you tie it up tight, String can stay taut. And then, well, what's a string? Are you going to put 1,000 strings? That's like, what are you making a wall out of macrame? That's a lot of work. But I don't need to have it fully filled. All I need to have is less than 3, and then I'll tie another string. Okay, so that's another part of my wall. And then another less than 3 gap of air, and I'll tie another string up here. I already got my 3 tefachim. This is going to be less than 3 from the ground. That's 9. Just make it a little bit higher. Or you could say the string will be itself. The string has to have some width. And there's your 10 tefachim. There's your wall, made out of 3 or 4 strings. Creative, huh? It's halachic wall. I wouldn't suggest you build your house that way. But it does fit the constraints of the system, the legal system. That's the way the halacha is defined. If less than 3 tefachim is considered to be connected, all you need is a set of strings. And this is the solution for somebody who wants to use, for his sukkah, he wants to use a sheet or some kind of cloth. Oh, the wind is going to blow it too far away, and it's hard to get it so taut that it doesn't. I'm worried maybe it's going to be blowing so much that it's not considered to be a wall. So what do? You can usually, in addition to the sheet, the truth is, you can forget about the sheet. All you need to do is tie up some strings, each one within 3 tefachim of each other. And that will be essentially the wall. And then you can have here a sheet that blows in the wind as much as you want. Because really the real wall, now some of these, if you tie up a string, it'll stop. It'll stop the sheeting from blowing too much, which is nice. But the main thing is that the strings themselves can be a kosher wall. There's some Sukkot which are sold now that they have the structure, the frame, because it's a temporary structure. People want to put it up and take it down and leave it for the next year. So they have these metal frames they sell. There's a kibbutz in Israel, a religious kibbutz who popularized this system called Nechalim. And that became known as Sukkot Nechalim. They market it, they sell it, now of course there's copycats, but it's a sukkah made up of, essentially what you buy is these metal poles, metal structure. And then you buy sheeting, and then you put schachan. It's the simplest way to make a sukkah. You don't have to buy boards. A lot of the other option is to buy these panels, put them together and make a sukkah. But it's much simpler. Just make a frame and put up the sheeting. Then people say, oh, the sheeting blows too much. They said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to sell our metal frame with an additional piece of metal. Instead of string, we're going to have a metal bar here, a metal bar here, and a metal bar here. And that with less than 3 in between them. So you have the frame with it's already pre-made so that it just fits like Lego, one into the other. You have, of course, these metal frames that make up the rest of the structure. But then at the bottom of the structure, you're going to see 3 additional metal frames. It's not to make it strong. It's to make it halachically kosher. Lavud is the principle that connecting. Lavud means connected. And this law allows us to have a very minimal wall. And the minimal wall can be string, it can be ropes, it can be straps. Some sell, instead of metal, it's much easier to sell straps. And that way, you really don't need any cloth, but if you do put up the cloth will not blow in the wind too much. And so basically you've got a cloth wall all around you, or some kind of sheets, or plastic sheets. It's like a tent material. Many Sukkot are sold with a tent-like material, which are the walls. You just have to have the kosher schach, which is the main part of the sukkah. Kosher, according to these rules, basically some kind of vegetation, and that's your kosher sukkah. So we went from a solid wall to minimizing the width and the height of it. But now the actual material we can minimize down from a solid wall to having gaps in it. And even the solid parts can be very minimal. As long as they are within 3 tfachim of each other, it can even be as little as a string. And that constitutes, what I have in my sukkah is, I'll draw just one more here. My sukkah is very tall because I'm tall. I don't want to bang my head, right? My sukkah is very tall. And it's nicer. We get lots of air that way, and but the rule is, there's another rule, just like Lavud, there's another rule, it's called Gudasik, you don't have to know these names right now. And the rule says as follows: if you have a kosher wall here, 10 tfachim, right, here's our kosher wall, right, check, it's a kosher wall. Halachically, we consider the wall goes up to the sky. It doesn't have to be solid all the way to the roof. It doesn't have to be solid. All you need is a halachic wall in the lowest 10 tfachim, in the lowest 80 centimeters. The wall has to be this height, waist height. So basically I have a solid wall here in my balcony. I make my sukkah on my balcony. So the balcony has a solid wall around it, like a patio, right? So I've got a fence on my patio, so this is what I have. And then my schach is up here. What do I have here? A beautiful view of Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Oh, nothing. I have it open. I don't have any sheets. I don't have any strings. I've got a solid wall here. It's 10 tfachim high, for sure. I made sure it's 10 tfachim according to all opinions. I actually elevated it a little bit with some flower pots. So up here I have some nice flowers. You'll see. And then above, I have the beautiful view. I don't have to have it all closed in. It's a kosher wall because the bottom 10 tfachim is kosher. It's called gudasik, that the wall goes up. The wall goes up. This is what it was. This is a problem. Yeah. Show everybody. The problem is that the bottom is larger than 3 tfachim. And so, we said over here, you have to have less than 3. The picture that he's showing has more than 3 at the bottom. And so it's not considered a kosher wall because it's not connected to the ground. You see that picture? Show everybody the picture. The rest of the wall is fine. But the problem is you have the lowest rung is missing. To make it kosher, it's very easy. Hananel, you hear how to make it kosher? Yeah, pass it around. Pass it around. You know how to make that kosher? Who can tell me how to make that sukkah kosher? What do you have to do to make the wall kosher for a sukkah? You just have to add an additional string over here. You see what I'm saying? And then that'll be less than 3 from the ground and less than 3 from that partition that you have, and then it's kosher. One other thing to consider is that this is a beautiful halacha. This is a beautiful halacha. Say what? Yeah, one second. I want to continue with Hananel's question. One more law, and then I'll take your question. Okay. Now the truth is, by the way, in my sukkah, I actually my kids didn't like it because this doesn't feel like a sukkah. It's not closed in. It doesn't feel like it. And so for a while, I put up some boards, even though I didn't need to, halachically. I wanted them to feel comfortable, and what are they going to put their decorations on if there's no wall? So now I have a curtain, actually. I actually sort of like have a blind that goes up and down. I use it to block the sun. Stephen was there. He knows what I'm talking about. You've seen it, Yosef, too? Did you see it on my porch, the blind, the curtain that goes up and down? Maybe not.
I've seen it in
Yeah,
the house.
in my house, yeah. So sometimes I put up the curtain, sometimes I take down the curtain. It doesn't have halachic significance. It's just to make it comfortable in the sukkah. Now, Hananel, let's say you have a non-kosher sukkah like you showed me, and you want to make it kosher. Very easy. Just put in the extra plank or string or something that makes sure that there's no gap of larger than 24 centimeters. 3 tvachim is 24 centimeters. Right? So if there's more than 24 centimeters, you're going to be trouble. So if you fill in the gap, there is another law. It says, it's called ta'aseh. In the Torah it says, Chag HaSukkot ta'aseh lecha. You shall make for yourself Sukkot. And the sages transmitted to us a halacha which says, Ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asui. And not from something that was already made. So if you have, for example, well, I might even have a picture here. Here's some pictures of funny Sukkot. They don't have the one I'm looking for. We'll go through them one by one in a second. But I'll draw it then. Ah, here it is. This one. Let's say you have a haystack. Everybody see this is a haystack? Stack of hay. And you say, well, is hay kosher for schach? What do you say?
Yes.
Yeah, it grows from the ground. And it's not a vessel. So it's a kosher schach. What am I missing? I'm missing walls. And I'm missing the internal area. So I'll pull out some hay from the middle of the haystack, and I'll make sure that there's 7 by 7 area, 10 tvachim high, and that'll be my sukkah, the haystack. The Gemara says that's not kosher. You know why? Because of ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asui. Basically, the schach has to be made and not pre-made. Here, the haystack was there; it was pre-made. Basically, the schach was made before the walls in the haystack. You didn't have the walls yet. You didn't have that internal volume that was a kosher structure, and you already had the schach there. And so, Hananel, in your case, if you already made a sukkah which is not kosher because the walls were not kosher, and then you kosherize the walls, what you have to do is you have to take off the schach and then put them back on again, because the schach has to go on after the walls are up. But it's okay, you take it off, put it back on. That's not hard. But halachically, ta'aseh, you have to make it. V'lo min ha'asui, can't be already from the something that was already done, without it being a sukkah. Basically, you have to put the schach on for the sake of a sukkah. When you have kosher walls, it becomes a sukkah. If you do it in the opposite order, you're in trouble. Okay, yes, so what was your question?
I have two questions actually. One is, does the mechitza rules apply in the sukkah as well? Like,
What are mechitza rules?
say visual damaging, and is it okay that you leave?
So far I mentioned that there's rules of structures in 2 areas of halacha. One is Shabbat, right? And one is Sukkah. You're saying we have rules of structures in another area of halacha. Which area are you talking about?
It's like in Baba Batra, like visual damaging.
Excellent. There's rules of neighbors. You're not allowed to be a peeping Tom to avoid the privacy of your neighbor. So you're not allowed to damage your neighbor. Even looking into your neighbor's property is considered to be damage in halacha. You have to be very careful about other people's privacy. And so halacha and Baba Batra discusses walls in between properties. And so Yosef is saying, well, let's compare the rules of walls of the sukkah to the rules of walls of Baba Batra. The answer is no, we don't. That's a different set of rules. that have to do with neighbors and damaging each other. When it comes to a sukkah, what we care is to create a temporary residence, and as long as it's a kosher residence, it's kosher. I think even if people can see in, I don't think that anybody considers that to be a invalidation of the sukkah. So yeah, it's very important, very interesting. We have rules which are somewhat similar in various areas of halacha, various mitzvot. Each one has their own set of rules. Sometimes we compare and contrast. Sometimes they're the same. Sometimes we learn them out from each other, and sometimes we don't. It's a complicated system. This is the Torah Sheba'al Peh. Helps us with that. Another question?
Yeah, second question is the Rabbi says that there is like a mitzvah of creating a sukkah. What if I have a non-Jew friend who wants to help me build a sukkah?
So we already said it twice, I believe, in 2 different classes, that there's no mitzvah to build a sukkah. The actual act of building the sukkah is not a mitzvah. What is the mitzvah?
To dwell.
To dwell in it. So if you have a non-Jew who builds a sukkah for you, there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
Because the building is not considered the mitzvah. It happens all the time. I have a friend who now has been a contractor, building renovations for about 30 years. He started off, his original business was, he would go around the neighborhood and knock on the doors of little old ladies and say, would you like me to build your sukkah for you? So, oh, thank you, because I can't do it myself, or even an old man. I used to be able to build my sukkah I have these planks, I keep them in the garage from year to year, and I put them up, but I just can't do it anymore. And that's how his original business was, putting up Sukkot for old people. And then one thing led to the next, and he became a contractor. He actually builds houses now. 30 years later, he developed his skills a little bit, but he's self-taught. A very interesting guy. He actually helped build part of my house many years ago. When he first made Aliyah, I helped him, get a job. In any case, so you can have an entire company of non-Jews that are building, helping people put up their Sukkot. Totally kosher, no problem. Some people are a little more Kabbalistically inclined. They say, well, to them I would say maybe the schach, you should have a Jew put on the schach, but it doesn't have to be that. Because I did say that there is another opinion. Remember, I said, those who were listening, I said in the Yerushalmi, the Talmud Yerushalmi, they actually made a bracha when creating the sukkah, and there was an opinion there that it's a mitzvah to build a structure. We don't follow that opinion, but there is that opinion. So if you want to be machmir, there's maybe room to at least the essential part of the sukkah, the schach, maybe that should be put on by a Jew. And as I said, there's room to be machmir. But essentially, halachically, anybody could build it. The structure, there's no mitzvah to build it, there's a mitzvah to dwell in it. You can't have a non-Jew do that for you. It's so hot outside, so Jose, will you sit in the sukkah for me? Make kiddush for me. Right, the hardest one is they say, some people actually, there's a custom to say Kaddish when your parents die. And some people have the custom is to say for 11 months every day. That could be too hard. People don't have time, they're busy. So they pay someone else to say Kaddish for them. It's a strange custom, it's strange. But people do that. That's as long as someone is saying the Kaddish on behalf of your deceased parent, so then in some way you're sanctifying God's name. But you can't do the same thing with, for example, the mitzvah of tefillin. Pay someone to put on tefillin for you. Why? It's a mitzvah of the body. You can't replace your body. Have your avatar put on tefillin. You can't do that. It just doesn't work. You've got to do it yourself. Same thing with sitting in the sukkah. Nobody can do it for you. You've got to, if you're too ill, you're patur. So yeah, it's a good question though. Yeah, non-Jew can definitely. So if you want to work before Sukkot here in the neighborhood, if you're not finished your conversion yet, have no compunctions. By all means, you're allowed to build a sukkah for them, and it's a fine kosher sukkah, even if you've not finished the kippur process. It would be kosher to invite a Jew to come into your sukkah. No problem. As long as it's a kosher sukkah. Now you know the rules, right? Less than 3 gaps, and you know what the kosher schach is, minimum measurements, the maximum, the size, the structure. We're all good to go? Okay, I know you're curious, so let's look at the pictures. Let's look at the pictures. This is based on Masechet Sukkah. What is Masechet Sukkah? So it's called a book or a tractate. What does that mean? Where would you find Masechet Sukkah? Where would you find it? In the books, where would you find it? Where would you look? In the Tanakh? Is there a Masechet Sukkah in the Tanakh? You know all the 24 books of the Tanakh, right? It's not, there's no Masechet Sukkah. That's not the name of a book of the Tanakh. What is it? It's the name of a book of the Mishnah, and therefore there's Gemara on it, and therefore it's one of the books of the Talmud. Both correct answers. There's a Masechet Sukkah in Mishnah, and then the Gemara commentary on it is called Gemara of Masechet Sukkah. And essentially that's a part of the Talmud. So you could, but all 3 answers would be correct if you said Mishnah, Gemara, or Talmud. They'd all be correct. Masechet Sukkah is one of those books. How many books are there in the Talmud? Well, how many books are there in the Mishnah? Same thing. Well, there's 6, not books, there's 6 orders. That's categories. Each one has approximately 10. Sum total, 63 books in the Mishnah. Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. There's 6 orders, 6 categories. But each one, it's not exactly 10 each. Some are a little bit less than 10, some are 9 or 8, the other ones are 11 or 12. But altogether, the way we count it, the way we divide it now, we divided into 63. Originally, there were some other divisions. I imagine the plan was that there would be 60. Just to be neat, you know, some people are a little bit obsessive about things being very structured and ordered. Bothers me. Why are there 63 Masechtot in the 6 orders? There should be 60. So you can divide them up a little bit differently. Anyways, Masechet Sukkah is one of those 63 books. Guess what it talks about? About the laws of, and the meaning also. It's like our book about the laws of Sukkah. That's where it all stemmed from. This is the major discussions, of course. There could be discussions elsewhere as well. And from this page that you're looking at now, full of pictures, what do you think it discusses in particular?
How to build.
The laws of building a sukkah and the laws of dwelling in the sukkah and the 4 species, the laws of the 4 species, the 2 special mitzvot of the sukkah. The truth is, it discusses also the laws of sukkah in the temple and how it was practiced in the temple and how it's practiced differently nowadays. You can see there's a little pictures of the temple here and some of the sacrifices in the temple. And so, the laws of the holidays in the temple. They had instruments, dancing. Simchat Beit HaShoeva. Remember I told you they juggled fire? Simchat Beit HaShoeva. Remember the big parties? And this was such a big party. They had these massive lanterns filled with oil. They had ladders going up so people could light the lanterns. And they didn't have projectors in those days, LEDs. So they used oil lamps, but they made them very large. And it was like torches, and it lit up the entire courtyard so that people could dance and play their instruments. This was the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. Anyways, the beginning and the major part up until here, the major part of the Masechet talks about a sukkah, different laws of sukkah. So let's try and see. This sukkah, is it kosher? What do you think? Yes, it's similar to what I described I have in my sukkah, right? Only the bottom is a wall, but the wall halachically goes up all the way to the schach. And so that's a kosher sukkah. Good. What happens? Let's see. What's this?
This one I saw.
A sukkah on a boat. Is it kosher? Is it kosher? Yes, it's kosher. That's what we say. Let's say this one. Is this sukkah kosher? It's very, very tall. What's the rule?
9
20 amot, or approximately 9 meters, not kosher. So that's not a kosher sukkah. This is something we didn't discuss yet. Here, look at this guy on his porch. He put a nice sukkah with schach on it, but there's a tree that's covering it.
Yeah.
Is that kosher or not? Why not?
Because he didn't build it himself.
A, he didn't build it himself, but B,
cover this.
but this tree, isn't that kosher schach? Why is it not kosher? It's not detached. It has to be detached from the ground. He has some detached leaves, but it's covered over. It's like if you build a kosher sukkah, then you put a tarp on top. We did that in Canada when I grew up, but that invalidated the sukkah. When it stopped raining or snowing, and we wanted to go out into the sukkah again, we had to take the tarp off. Okay, so if there's the tree covering it that's still connected to the ground, so then it invalidates the sukkah underneath it. Let's see what else we have here.
Question.
Yeah.
What if the tree covered part of the sukkah and left the part of it could be valid and part could be invalid?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. We have that a lot on balconies, where you have tall apartment building. And so if they built it with one balcony on top of the other balcony, the guy on top is the only one that can have a sukkah.
Yeah.
Because all the ones on the bottom balconies are covered by the balcony. So your schach's not going to help you because it has to be up until the sky. Just schach. But sometimes they have buildings where they build the balcony staggered. You know what I mean? So you have the tall building, okay, and then you've got this apartment's got your balcony over here, and then this guy's got a balcony over here. So this part is not going to be kosher. But this part is kosher. You just put your schach here on this part. But here where you get into the conditions that are important. How big has to be the part that's not covered over by the balcony above it? How big?
Footprint 7 by 7.
7 by 7. 7 by 7. As long as you've got 7 by 7 here, that part is a kosher sukkah. So, the truth is it's a little bit unpleasant, but you do what you can if you have a couple who lives in this apartment over here, and this is 7 by 7, the area that's covered. The rest of the balcony, you could sit there. It's just not kosher as a sukkah. So the couple sits outside. Who's going to sit on which side of the porch? The man or the woman? We said that essentially women are exempt because it's a time-bound mitzvah. So they can sit together, sort of half in the sukkah and half out the sukkah. Even though they're both on the balcony. One side is halachically kosher, and one's not halachically kosher. The man is obligated, he should be sitting in the sukkah to eat, and the woman can join him, but she's not in the halachic sukkah. Best is if they can both be in the sukkah, ideally. But if push comes to shove and there's only room for one person, ultimately we go back to the original halakha, that women are exempt. They don't have to. Yes, you can have that. What else do we have here? Let's see what else we have here. Here's the third wall being only 1 tefach. First thing I mentioned today over here, 1 tefach, and then a 3 tefachim gap, as long as it's close enough. Here they added something else. Some rabbis say that really to make it most kosher, you should have over here, on top of this gap, you should have a string. You should have a post over here and a post over here and connect it to over here, so that even though you don't have solid wall over here, you do have, it's called the frame of a door, tzurat petach. You can see that over here. But that's already more detailed. Here we saw already the haystack. Now, very important halacha. Take a look at this sukkah. Is it kosher or not? What's going on in this sukkah? He's got 3 walls, 4 walls, well, 3 walls, that's fine. And he's got tzchach. What's the problem?
The roof.
What's wrong with the roof?
It's not enough.
He's got tzchach. What's enough? Enough.
The top.
Yeah, what's wrong? How much do you have to have?
How much?
He has branches.
Covering everything.
So that's the question that we have to deal with. How much tzchach do you have to have? How much tzchach do you have to have? How thick does it have to be? Take a look at page 32. Okay, Idan, will you read for us, please? Page 32.
Shade must exceed the sun.
Yeah.
The shach must
Sechach.
Sechach
Yeah.
must provide protection from the sun. As long as the sechach blocks most of the sun's rays, the sukkah is kosher. As the halakhic principle that most is tantamount to all. Go, okay, below is invoked. This is measured at the level of the shechach. So even if at the floor of the sukkah it seems that there is more sun than shade, as long as the shade exceeds the sun at the level of the shechach, the sukkah is kosher. This is because as the sun's rays descend, they become broader but also weaken. So in truth, there is more shade than sun.
Okay, so what's the rule? How much tzchach do you need? A majority. You need a majority. The majority of, really we measure it by the result. It has to be a majority of shade versus, so if you have 51% of, covering, that's good enough. But lechatchila, what does lechatchila mean? What does lechatchila mean? What does lechatchila mean? Look at the page. There's a glossary at the back. Page 153 in the back of your book. There's a glossary. It says ab initio. The level of performance that satisfies an obligation in an ideal manner. Wow. A level of performance that satisfies an obligation in an ideal manner. That's a long definition. But that's what the word lechatchila means. Literally it means in the first place. It's an ideal performance. It's the ideal performance. It's a level of performance that satisfies an obligation in an ideal manner. So, if you look on your pages, you have the word. Remember this? So we have here that there's a number 7. It says there is the ideal performance, or the goal is lechatchila, literally the first choice or the starting position. And the opposite of lechatchila is b'diavad or b'di'evid. Some people pronounce it that way, which means it's not the ideal, optimal way to fulfill the mitzvah, but it is a minimal fulfillment. It's acceptable. It's not ideal, but acceptable. So 51% is acceptable. B'di'evid. Literally it means after the fact. B'di'evid is Aramaic for after the fact. But also, it doesn't have to be afterwards, even if beforehand. You could say something is kosher, b'di'evid, which is, it's a minimal fulfillment. But ideally, we're trying to strive to fulfill the mitzvot in a lechatchila form, in an ideal performance. Performance that fulfills the obligation in an ideal way. So lechatchila, back to our page 32, second paragraph, lechatchila.
Lechatchila, the sechach should provide plenty of shade so that it is pleasant to sit in the sukkah. At the same time, it should not be so thick that it is like a permanent home. That is ideally preferable that stars be visible through the sechach at night, or at least sunlight should be visible during the day. B'diavad, however, even if no ray of sun can penetrate the sukkah, it is still kosher. If the sukkah is so thick that even rain cannot penetrate, some maintain that the sukkah is invalid because it is like a permanent home. One should refer to this view. However, under pressing circumstances when it is impossible to thin the sukkah, such as on Shabbat and Yom Tov, one may sit in a sukkah and even recite the bracha Hamdulillah.
Okay, so you learned the terms of the Chatchila and B'diavad? Make yourself able to use these terms. Ideally, you should be able to have lots of shade and be able to see some stars or some sunlight. But B'diavad, the level of performance which is not ideal but still kosher is even if it's totally filled up, 100% covering, it's still kosher schach. Not one ray of sun comes in. It's still kosher. You don't have to see the stars. That's the urban legend I mentioned the other day, right? People think you have to be able to see the stars. Not really. It's still kosher. Ideally, it's nice, but it's not obligatory. Now, what happens when you have uneven coverage or you have a gap? Let's say you've got a nice sukkah structure, 7 by 7, 10 tefachim high, you got 3 walls, 4 walls, and then you have schach over half of it. Half the sukkah is covered and half is not covered. So do we have a picture of that? Let's see. Here we do. No. What are they showing us here? This is the closest. Yeah, this is the closest to what I'm talking about here. Let's say you have schach over most of the sukkah, and it's a nice thick covering that gives you more shade than sun. But then this area, you don't have any schach. What's the halacha about that? Similarly, you might have over here, this sukkah, it's got lots of leaves, but in between there are planks, which I'm looking for another example of something which makes the schach invalid on top of the sukkah. Do we have anything like that?
That's another sukkah as well, yeah?
Sorry?
This one is also invalid because it's wall.
No, a wall is fine. You can have a solid wall.
Solid wall.
Solid wall is fine, right?
But it's permanent attached to the ground.
It's true. That's the way you would define permanent. But the way the halacha defines permanent or impermanent is primarily about the schach. What makes the building permanent or impermanent is the roof. Sukkah is the language of covering. Schach is covering. That's really the critical point. If the schach is kosher, it's considered to be a temporary dwelling, even if it's made out of bricks and stones, no problem. So what about this sukkah, which is partially covered? So over here also you have partially covered with, this is not schach, this is just some kind of a covering.
Yeah.
So the rule is a little complicated, but the bottom line is, the part which has kosher schach is kosher. The part which doesn't have kosher schach is not kosher. Now you have to make sure that the part with kosher schach has the minimum measurements. You can't take into account the rest of the building because it doesn't have kosher schach. So you have to make sure that you've got your 7 by 7 at least, like we saw on the balcony, right? Now sometimes you can have a gap in the schach, and as long as it's not, anybody take a guess, how many tfachim wide? As long as it's not 3 tfachim wide, then it doesn't invalidate the rest of the schach, and you can even have some invalid schach mixed in. Some people have some metal support beams to hold up their schach. We'll have to talk about that in greater detail, but that metal is definitely not kosher schach. It is susceptible to tuma. Metal rods are susceptible to tuma. And so the question is, can you sit underneath? Or let's say, people hang up decorations in the sukkah. Decorations are made out of sometimes vessels. Or they're fruit. Fruit is susceptible to tuma. Fruit is not kosher schach. So you have beautiful kosher schach, but right underneath the kosher schach, you hang a nice big watermelon. Okay, that's too heavy, but a nice big bunch of grapes. And someone hosts you, and they sit you down in your chair, and you look up, and you see right above you, you've got this bunch of grapes. So you're not sitting under kosher schach. Is that allowed or not? So the answer is yes, it's allowed, as long as it's less than 3 tfachim. Wide, it's considered to be nullified to the schach above it. But if it was totally empty, if you were sitting underneath a gap, then you shouldn't sit there. You should move to the right or move to the left. You shouldn't sit under the sky. If you have some covering, a minimal covering, that's good enough. It doesn't all have to be of equal width, of equal thickness. But it gets complicated. There's no end to this number of scenarios. You'd think in one little house, how many situations? But everybody builds their own house, and everybody's got a different style, and sometimes they use whatever materials they have. So there's and what a lot of people do for schach nowadays, because for many years I would buy from somebody who brings branches. I don't have a lot of palm trees near where I live. So somebody went to the farm where they have lots of palm trees. They're growing dates. And they cut down a lot of the branches. And they bring them in a truck. And I buy from him 5 shekels, a palm, not so bad. Cover my schach, cover my sukkah. But then, so let's say I need 10 of them, so that's 50 shekels. Okay. That's the cost of doing business, right? You want to do mitzvahs? Some of them cost money. What are you paying for your arba minim, for your 4 species? Maybe you're paying 100, maybe 200, whatever. It's the cost of doing business. You want to have the mitzvahs, you have to pay for it. You want to have tzitzit, it costs some money. It costs 100 shekels. I don't know, 200 shekels. There's different kinds, right? Mm-hmm. You have to pay some money. But then I scratched my head once. And I said, each year I go to this guy and I buy these nice green-looking branches, palm branches, and it covers my sukkah. But I spend at least 50 shekels. Truth is, I have a little bit of a bigger sukkah. So I need more than 10, maybe 20. That's 100 shekels each year. And then the palm branches, they dry out. They become brown instead of green. It's not so pretty. I don't want. It's still kosher. I don't mind it so much, but my kids always bug me and say, Abba, it's not pretty, it's not green. All right, so I buy another 20 branches. So each year I'm putting out 100 shekels, and then another 100 shekels, and then 100 shekels. There is something called permanent schach. A little bit confusing because it's supposed to be impermanent. But what do? They basically take reeds, usually it's bamboo or some kind of a thin reeds, and they string them together, and they make a mat. And then when Sukkot is over, you roll up the mat, and you put it in your storage. And then when the next year comes, you don't have to pay another 100 shekels each year. You just take the mat out, you buy it once, and each year you use it for 7 days, you roll it up, and you put it away. And even though the mat costs you 200 shekels, you only do it once. And not every year. So you make the calculation. Over 10 years, you save money. So you invest a little bit, buy more expensive schach, but it'll be useful for many, many years. That's why they call it permanent. Even though it's made out of materials they're kosher for schach, let's call it. They're organic materials, and they're not in a vessel. You have to be careful that they don't use metal to string the bamboo together. Some do. And those are not really kosher because metal is susceptible to tuma. That's the other condition. But now they're smart enough. They know they tie them together with soft with material that's also straw, like sort of strings made out of some kind of bamboo or some kind of what's that? Wood bark or something that you can make string out of, some fibers from a tree, and they string them together in a way with something which is not susceptible to tuma. And essentially, as long as that mat is not used for, most people don't use it for a rug, but in some countries, in some places, some mats, they use them as rugs. As long as it's used for covering, then you can use it for your schach. And that's last year I bought like 3 mats. I'm still going to get some branches, I think, to add some green color to it. And I have a section of my schach which is made from thin beams, thin wooden slats, like I was telling you. Those are kosher as long as they're thin. So I have a combination. I haven't finished my sukkah yet. I don't have much to build because I don't have to build the walls. The walls are permanent from year to year. They're the walls of my balcony. But the schach, I have also the roof. I have a permanent wooden structure, frame. I just have to put something on top of it because it doesn't have 51% coverage. The frame that I have is just some support beams. So take a look on page 35. He says many people use schach lanetzach. Netzach means eternity. Schach for eternity, which is slats or narrow planks connected to one another with a string, forming a type of mat. Some say the schach is invalid, as linking the slats and planks with string, causing them to be considered planks that are more than 4 tefachim wide, which are invalid due to the decree against sealing material. However, common practice is not to be considered for this, as the slats and narrow planks are loosely connected, flexible, do not resemble the sort of planks used to build ceilings. So, yeah, you'll see many sukkot. It's the simplest way. Who wants to build a sukkah in the cheapest and simplest way? They're not really going to live there. They're not going to sleep there. Every restaurant has to provide a kosher restaurant has to provide a sukkah. You can't be selling food and then not have people have where to eat it. So every falafel stand, they have pita. They have to put up a sukkah. So what do? They get a sukkot nechalim, those metal frames, to put the sheeting. They sell the specially designed sheeting which you tie onto the frames. If they're good, they'll put some strings towards the bottom to make sure that the flaps don't blow too much in the wind. And they also buy a mat, schach lanetzach. Take it out of the storage every year. They keep the poles from year to year. They keep the schach from year to year. They take it out. It takes 5 minutes. You put together the frames as Lego, and you tie on the sheeting, maybe some strings, and then you put the mat on top. You're good to go. Very simple. Easiest way to build a sukkah in the world. Yeah.
So if it's sukkah and every kosher restaurant needs to provide a sukkah for the guests to eat in.
Yeah.
It's a street food place, like a falafel stand. It's that you're eating in the street. They have the sukkah. What if it's like a sit down restaurant? Like it's inside. What do they do?
They're gonna listen. They're allowed to be open because who is allowed to eat inside the restaurant on Sukkot? Women don't have to keep the law. They don't have to eat in the sukkah, and maybe somebody who's sick, or if it's cold, or if it's going to rain. So I think they're allowed to be open, but they're going to have a lot less customers if they don't have a sukkah. So they try to find outside on the sidewalk. It'll be filled with sukkot. in a country like we mentioned the other day in Stockholm, they won't let you build a sukkah on the sidewalk. With good reason, because people need to walk on the sidewalk. But here in Israel, it can be intrusive. But for 7 days, people understand. A lot of people are religious. They know it's our national holiday, Sukkot, and so you will find Sukkot in all sorts of places which are maybe less convenient for you, but they're kosher. There's only one more consideration I want to tell you about. Before you go buying a sukkah with metal beams, frame, and then put your schach on top. בוקר טוב.
הרב מספר את החיילים, אחד
כן.
יכול להוריד את המחם, ואז יחזיר
את הקומקום?
את הקומקום.
בסדר?
כן?
100%?
מי
בשמחה?
יביא את הקומקום?
מי מבין אותנו?
קומקום. חשמל. You bring it downstairs to -1? You bring it back?
Yeah.
After you finish putting it
תודה רבה. תודה רבה. There's a problem with our sukkah, our cheapy sukkah, right? We've solved the problem of the walls blowing in the wind, right? Because we put up some strings or some metal bars or whatever. And we solved the problem of the sukkah, the schach, drying out. We bought a mat, no problem. Even Rabbi Lama says it's kosher. If you buy the right kind, it should say kosher on it. Don't go to the gardening store, because most of the mats there have a metal string, which is more problematic. The problem is as follows. There is a law in the Talmud that says that, let's read it on page 35. Some maintain that just as something susceptible to tumah may not be used as schach, so too the schach may not be supported directly by something susceptible to tumah. So that no one mistakenly uses a schach, things susceptible to tumah or other invalid materials. Accordingly, the schach may not be supported directly by iron poles, beams that are susceptible to tumah, or other materials that are invalid for schach, such as plastic, which does not grow from the ground. Aha. So what do we do? If you look at the last line now, last two lines on page 35, although the decisive majority of poskim maintain that the schach can be supported by things susceptible to tumah, like these metal bars, lechatchila, what does that mean? Right. Ideally, it is good to show concern for the stringent view and not support the schach with things susceptible to tumah. Therefore, one who uses a metal frame for the walls of the sukkah should not, lechatchila, ideally, lay the schach directly on the metal, but rather should lay wooden beams across the metal and then place the schach on the wooden beams. However, one who wants to be lenient may place the schach directly on the metal, and the sukkah is still kosher, and they recite a bracha on it. But this is very common that people, they sell with the sukkah a few wooden beams. What those wooden beams are for is to make a separation between the frame, which is made out of metal, and the schach, which sits on top of it. So really, the schach's not sitting on the frame, it's sitting on the wooden beams. Wooden beams are supported by the schach. There is an opinion by the Chazon Ish in Bnei Brak, they're very careful about it, that even the supports of the supports should not, and the supports of the supports of the supports of the supports, you can't have any metal in your sukkah. Everything has to be made wood. It's very complicated, it's very hard to follow that stringency. Most people don't keep that stringency. But the first level, the support which is directly beneath your schach should be wood, ideally, and not made from metal. Don't hold up your schach with metal poles. Hold it up with wooden poles. Okay, so that's. Now, what about you put up your mat? This is a big problem. Take a look on page 37. The last paragraph. If the concern is that only an unusually strong wind might blow off the schach, then even according to the stringent wind, we may tie the schach down using ropes or zip ties, because under normal conditions, the schach will stay put. The whole purpose is simply to protect the schach from an unusual wind. But what happens if a usual wind can come and blow off your schach? That's not going to be kosher. Take a look at the top of the page, 37. If one wishes to be strict and not support the schach with materials susceptible to tumah, but he's concerned that an ordinary wind might blow the schach off, he may place heavy wooden beams, which are kosher for schach, atop the schach. So now you need another wooden beam to put on top of the schach so it doesn't blow off. If necessary, he may attach the beams to the sukkah, even with material that is invalid for schach, such as ropes, nails, plastic zip ties, because these materials are only supports of the supports, while the supports themselves, the beams, are kosher as schach. So, it's not as simple as it looks. Make a frame, put the schach on top. Well, you want to actually have the support being not by metal. And then what about the sukkah? The schach's going to blow off in the wind. There's a lot of winds in this country, this time of year specifically. And so somehow you've got to tie down that schach. I have at home, they sell it, special string, which was not spun and turned into a vessel. Some people say that the regular twine that you buy in the hardware store, that's going to be considered a vessel, susceptible to tumah. I don't want to tie my schach down with that, because then I'll be supporting the schach with a vessel, which is susceptible to tumah. So they sell special string, which is actually more like hairs or threads, fibers, which have never been spun or twisted together. It's just like a clump of hairs. You take a few of them, it has some strength. I tie down my schach with that. Or, and sometimes usually in addition, I also have some heavy wooden beams, which I put on top of the schach to make sure it won't blow off. Sometimes the winds are so strong, some years the winds are so strong, it blows the entire thing off with the heavy beams. But that's okay. That's an unusual wind. That doesn't happen regular year, unusual. So that's fine. As long as it stays down under normal conditions, that's good enough. And even if a strong wind comes and maybe it'll move the beam a little bit, it'll move the schach because, it forms a little bit of a sail, right? The wind can catch the schach from underneath, especially in my sukkah where I don't have walls, right? Or I have minimal walls. The wind comes in, it could push up the schach and it could be carried away. So I got to make sure that my schach is not going to be carried away in a regular wind. I don't have to worry about an unusual wind. If it falls off, put it back in, put it back down. As long as it's going to stay put for a usual wind, that's good enough. And I use a combination of this special string and putting heavy things on top of it. As long as the heavy things are made from wood, it's essentially kosher schach too. Most of the schach is not underneath the beam. So you're good to go. So far, so good? All right. I think we covered most of the laws of building a sukkah. And you can read ahead, you can see we covered lots of stuff even before. We're going to look once more at the laws of sitting under the decorations. We covered that as well. Gaps in the schach, we covered that as well. Intention is... We spoke about that you don't actually have to have intention for the mitzvah. So we'll finish up some issues about the structure of the sukkah, and then we'll talk about the parameters of chapter 3 of dwelling in the sukkah. B'ezrat Hashem tomorrow. I'll see you in a few minutes downstairs. We have a special gathering today, -1 in the new building, and I'll be teaching there a little bit not about Sukkot. We're still preparing for Rosh Hashanah and the New Year. But you'll get to meet everybody that's at Hashem in the department, and we'll continue over there with some refreshments as well. Okay.